Hello, I'm Richard Chambers, President and CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors, and welcome to another in my Insights and Advice series. Today I'm joined by Mike Maali. Mike is the Internal Audit, Compliance, and Risk Management Solutions Leader at PwC, based out of the Chicago office. Mike, it's good to have you with us.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Mike, as businesses were forced to shift to virtual and digital ways of doing things as we moved into the COVID-19 crisis, what were some of the challenges of ensuring workers were tech proficient and tech nimble?
Yeah, Richard, it's a good question, and I think I'll sort of go into it on two levels, one at the organizational level and then one maybe perhaps at the internal audit level. I think organizationally, you found a wide variety of different capabilities that existed. And I think the key, that tactical ability to execute, if you had the infrastructure already in place, was fine. If you didn't have that infrastructure in place, I think you saw a lot of people struggle, anywhere from things of just having, laptops in people's hands versus desktops. The bandwidth that you needed and so forth to get people remote through into the systems, things of that nature. I think that, most companies have done a pretty good job thus far of ultimately solving those issues and working through them. I think from an internal audit standpoint, I think we've seen some pretty significant differences between groups in terms of how they've been able to turn on it. Those groups that had really gone through a lot of what I'd call transformational type of activities and digitization activities and things of that nature already, I would say that the disruption in the execution was not as significant. It was certainly there with everybody, but I would say they actually fared pretty well. And what I think they were able to do that was interesting is because they were so well prepared, they were able to pivot really well with the emerging risks that were coming on and being relevant to those things. I think those groups that were not necessarily ready spent a lot of time trying to get ready and be relevant, and I think missed out on being, perhaps more value added to their organizations because they didn't have the ability to engage in the right way. And so I think, when you step back from it all, the big thing I think that this has opened up, and I know we'll probably talk a little bit more about this as we get through this, is that level of preparedness is one that, just like with any crisis management in your organization, I think as internal audit, you got to take your lessons learned, you got to step back and you got to say, all right, now, what impact does this have on me? And the big difference, we as internal auditors, we work a lot remotely anyway. However, the big difference is our auditees were not where we normally have them. Normally they're there, and they were remote as well. And so that was really the big challenge. And I think, we have to contemplate that thing in future plans.
Yeah, Mike, as you just alluded, this crisis is having a profound impact on internal audit. And I guess my question is, what are some of the impacts you're seeing on the profession? And do you think that internal audit is up for the challenge?
Yeah, it's a good question, Richard. And I think, we've been certainly giving it a lot of thought and having a lot of discussions with a number of different organizations. I think that, as you step back from it, I think that there are three things that you need to you kind of came to light around this. Is the need to really ramp up that virtual capability, including collaboration across the lines. I think that, that need for the collaboration, given what we've gone through here, became very important. I think embracing, digital operating models and really thinking about how do I actually do things differently, and not just, adding on, but rather how am I actually changing the way that I audit? And then I think that the big mistake that we see sometimes is letting the technology drive the transformation versus really the people in the process driving along with the technology enabling to drive the digital transformation. I think that, we found that a lot of people would have, they're using bots or they're using analytics, but they really haven't necessarily incorporated that into changing the way that they were executing. And I think that those were some of the challenges. So I think, overall, I do think that, internal audit is up for the challenge. But I think it's going to be a heavier lift for organizations that have continually put this off and have not made some of the investments and the changes that they needed to have made.
So Mike, this COVID-19 has taught us a lot about disruption, as you alluded earlier, and the speed with which change seemingly appears out of nowhere. I've written a blog recently where I talked about the shelf life of information in this environment is extremely short. And yet a lot of internal audit departments have a more traditional way of reporting information to their clients. What advice might you offer to internal audit as to how they can leverage technology to get information passed along more quickly?
Yeah, Richard, it's interesting. I think that I actually believe that that's actually been happening even pre-COVID with the emerging technologies and emerging sort of capabilities that companies have implemented in their organization from a business standpoint. It's created an environment of rapid change. And I think COVID really helped even highlight that further and made the case for that ability to certainly be much more agile and much more current in terms of the observations and the activities that you're undertaking. And I think the COVID process sort of tested us in our ability to pivot to some of those important emerging things as they were happening. I sort of step back at it and say, all right, now knowing what I know, how do we react to that on a go forward basis? And it's not new concepts, actually, believe it or not. It's concepts that we've been all talking about for, many years now that have become a reality now, which is, we talk a lot about continuous monitoring as an example. The notion of, point in time auditing and the notion of developing a full audit report and all that kind of stuff, while certainly will have its place in a spectrum of activities that you might undertake, you're going to really need to be shifting a lot more to that continuous monitoring, the dashboarding, the readouts on a regular basis, that fluidity between the various lines of defense, as I said earlier, and sharing of risk information among the lines and back with the business. And I think you're going to have to really shift to that a lot faster than we probably initially even thought.
We're really auditioning here for what the future of internal audit looks like. What do you think are some of the risks that the profession will face or that internal audit departments will face if somehow they're not delivering on expectations from management and the boards of their companies?
One of the things that I have seen happen over the last few months is for those functions that were not really prepared, their organizations kind of moved on without them. And I think what it started to really put into question is, what do I need it for? Because it wasn't really there when I needed it and it wasn't ready. So I think that there is a risk that you can essentially become rationalized in a way, and maybe not eliminated, but certainly not invested in and seen as a value driver within the organization. So I think, that's right. That's exactly right. And I think, there is definitely a risk of that. And we've seen some elements of that, especially the organizations that made decisions to massively cut their audit plan. And some of it was cost driven, certainly, but some of it was just inability to execute driven, which was a problem. I think the other risk we talked about a little bit earlier, the speed at which things are changing. If you do not adapt to that and allow yourself to really be part of that change and in lockstep with the business, I think you're going to find yourself once again marginalized in a different way, in the sense that you're not evolving with where there's not only the technology investments and the things like that, but this is really where the skill sets come into play as well.
Now, that's a great point, Mike. I think you have some terrific insights for internal auditors, and I would hope that members of our profession are listening as folks like yourself are sharing these words of wisdom on how to navigate the challenge going forward. Thank you for joining me today, Mike. I'm Richard Chambers, President and CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors. Thank you all.
Thank you.